Welcome to the Language Justice webinar. We're really excited. I'll be honest, we are maybe also like slightly overwhelmed and intimidated because generally we work like with people in community where we live. So we appreciate your patience with us as we try out this webinar thing. With it being a webinar, we want to acknowledge that there are some limitations about just the amount of like dialogue and connection. And so we will do our best to make sure that this is a, place where we can connect and get to know each other. And you probably will be hearing like a lot from us. And sometimes you will be on mute and have your video off. And so we apologize about that. I just wanted to share really briefly about Cenzontle as a cooperative, who we are and what we do, and then we'll share a little bit about ourselves. So Cenzontle is called Cenzontle Language Justice Cooperative. It's a worker-owned cooperative. There are 10 of us. We all work as interpreters, translators, and trainers and consultants. And in a big way, our work was born out of the Highlander Center in Eastern Tennessee that trained many of us as language justice workers. And it also was born out of the Center for Participatory Change, which is based here in Asheville, North Carolina, and that does language justice work as well. And so we always want to honor and thank our teachers and our mentors who brought us into this work. And we formed a worker-owned cooperative to be able to collectively share language justice work and to build collective economic power. So that's a little bit about who we are as a cooperative. And we want to talk a little bit about what we're going to try to do tonight.
So the goals for this webinar are among sharing different definitions and perspectives on language justice, exploring things to remember when creating multilingual spaces, learn about different models of language justice work, reflect on all of our roles as language justice workers, and also know that we don't own the truth. We are just here to share, and we are also on our own journey with this. So we don't have all the answers, but we do have experience.
So that's what we're going to set out to do tonight. And one of the ways we want to do that is to like wake up a little bit, warm up a little bit, and get our minds ready to go around the work of language justice. And we're going to do that through something called the 30-second intro. This is a technique that interpreters often use to kind of warm up their brains. And so we thought this would be a nice way to open this space as well. And so what we'll do is Rocio will introduce herself for 30 seconds. And then we'll put ourselves on mute. And then you all, in the comfort of your own homes, with your privacy, with your own selves on mute, so no one's going to hear you but you're going to do your best to repeat exactly what Rocio said. So if Rocio says, "Hi, I'm Rocio," you will say, "Hi, I'm Rocio." She's going to go for 30 seconds and pause, and then you all will repeat exactly what you've got. If you miss something, don't worry, keep it going. And we're just going to try this out to warm up. So everybody ready? I'm going to get my clock ready. And Rocio will talk for 30 seconds. Go.
Hi, I'm Rocio. I am from San Luis Potosí, Mexico. I came to the United States when I was 12 years old, and I live now in Asheville. I love the mountains. I love my workspace, my coworkers, and I'm really glad we're doing this. I'm also very excited for this webinar, nervous, but excited to be here and to create this space with you all and give you best practices as we have experienced them ourselves.
Stop. Okay, so now you all, 30 seconds. I'm going to put myself on mute. Repeat everything back just as you heard it. Go. Stop. Do you all mind if we see each other's screens for a second? Okay, while we see if it's possible to see everybody's video, sorry, that's what I meant to say. And we're gonna try that one more time. So I'm gonna introduce myself for 30 seconds and you all will listen. And then I forgot to say, please don't take notes, just listen, rely on your memory. And then we'll put ourselves on mute and you all will try to repeat, okay? Hi, my name is Andrea Golden. I am a worker owner of Cenzontle Language Justice Cooperative. I also work for a community organization called Poder Emma Community Ownership that works on cooperative development. So you can see I do love being part of a cooperative. I also have 3 kids. I have a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And my whole family in some way or another are all dedicated to language justice work. Okay, you all try to go and repeat it out loud to yourselves. Okay, stop. So that was just a little bit of a warm-up. And part of the reason we wanted to do that is to get our brains moving, but part of the other reason we wanted to do that was to really think about what it's like to be in the interpreter's shoes, to be listening to what someone is saying, and to be trying to portray it with the precise message, with the feeling, with the tone, with the personality, really trying to carry the message of that person. And so we wanted to start kind of by creating that empathy and that identification with interpreters. We wanted to do one other kind of like quick game to get warmed up. And so you will need a pen and a paper for this game. So we want to give you a couple seconds to grab a pen and a paper. And then Al, if it's okay with everyone, if we could see everyone's video, we would like to kind of see each other for this game.
All right, you got it. In 10 seconds,
okay.
I'm gonna enable your videos. That doesn't mean you'll automatically show up, but you will have the option of showing your videos.
Great, it's just so much better to see faces than just see the screen. Thank you all so much. So what we're going to do next is a game. Again, it's often used as an interpreter training game, and it's called dual task math. I hope you all at least somewhat like math for the next minute or so. So what we're going to do is I'll be reading out loud random words off of a page. You all just want to repeat those random words. That part of it sound good? Yes? Okay. But the other thing that you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing math on your sheet. So you're going to start with the number 100, and then you're going to subtract by 3s, writing it down. So you'll write like 100, 97, 94, okay? You're just going to keep subtracting to go as low as you can while repeating the random words that I'm saying. Are you all ready for this? Okay, here we go. Rocio, will you time? Let's just do this for like 30 seconds. We're just gonna warm up. Okay, and just repeat out loud the words that I'm saying while you do your math. Workshop, relationships, understanding, participants, bilingual, encouraging, minutes, understand, value, importance, explain, examples, sharing, definition, personal, campaign. Okay, stop. How did that go? Any kind of gestures, facial expressions, anything in the chat? How did it feel to do that? Ooh, thumbs down. So again, part of the reason why we open with this is to start to get like a small taste for those of you all that might not be interpreters but want to be engaged in language justice work of what's happening in an interpreter's brain as they're doing the work of an interpreter. And because we believe that it's important for us all to kind of understand the responsibilities that we're carrying as language justice workers. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as the webinar goes on. We are going to, Rocio and I are going to share a little bit about just kind of like creating a framework for language justice in the ways that we understand it, and some of the nuts and bolts just around language justice work, creating multilingual spaces. And then we will have two special surprise guests that will be joining us to talk about their experiences as language justice workers. And so for the next little bit, we will be sharing our screen of a PowerPoint. It's not our normal style, but we're going to go for it because we are on a webinar and we are trying out some new things tonight. So just give me a moment while I try to share my screen.
So, am I on mute? Okay. So, what is language justice? Well, a 90-minute workshop can't possibly cover everything about language justice. Our relationships to language change, as does our understanding of language justice. We will be sharing a lot from the perspective of interpreters and the experiences that we bring around how to create multilingual spaces and work. My personal definition of language justice is that language access for those who do not feel as comfortable in the dominant language here, that's English, because I myself went through that. When I came to this country, I knew like 5% of the language, and it's an isolating place. And also, we all have things to share and to enrich others and everybody's experience. And so I want to be able to give that to the people as I would have liked for myself.
So like Rocio said, there are a lot of ways to think about language justice. And if we were to ask each of us on this webinar, we probably each would have a different definition of language justice because it's so related to our experience around language. We want to offer just some ways to think about language justice as a starting point. Oftentimes when we say language justice, what's being talked about is actually language access, which is an important piece of language justice, but it's not the whole picture. And so when we talk about language access, we might be talking about working with interpreters and translators to make sure that when people are trying to connect across a language barrier or language difference, that they're able to have full communication and build a relationship. And so that's one part of language access, and it is something that we'll be talking about more on this call. But another part of language justice work that we think is very important is around language equity and around challenging the dominant language in any context or space. And so just speaking from our personal experience as interpreters and organizers in Asheville, North Carolina, oftentimes the dominant language in a space is English. And so we believe that we are called as language justice workers not only to provide interpretation into Spanish, but to push back on that English always is the dominant language and find ways to create more balance of language within a space. It may also be that sometimes in our context, Spanish is the dominant language, and there are speakers of indigenous languages that are trying to find a way to bring their languages into the space to push back against Spanish as the dominant. And so again, given your context, you may find different languages being the dominant language, and as language justice workers, we want to find a way to bring all of those voices and all of that wisdom into the room. We also think that language justice work is the work of cultural organizing. It's the work of language revitalization. It's the work of connecting to arts and culture and language. And so we actually will be having our special guest that I mentioned that will be talking more about that. Another part of language justice work is the work of resource allocation and redistribution. For any of you all that either work for nonprofits or institutions or local governments or foundations, you know that we're constantly struggling with what is it that we're investing in, what are we dedicating resources to, and to really build a commitment to language justice means taking an organizational or institutional stance on understanding the real costs associated to do it well, and often that's something that takes building over time. And we also just want to offer that we think that language justice work is also the work of multiracial organizing. We feel called as language justice workers to create spaces where people can come together to organize, to build coalitions, to build campaign work. This can happen on a neighborhood level, on a local level, on a regional or a national level. And we share this because it's important for us to really remember that all of us can be language justice workers. Here we're sharing just some of the roles of language justice workers, and we think it's important to name because just like I said, Rocio and I are here as interpreters and translators, but we believe that all of us can be language justice workers, and it doesn't require being bilingual or multilingual. So another important part of being a language justice worker is being someone that really learns the ins and outs of the logistics of the coordination, of following the hand signals when the interpreters tell you that you're going too fast, of really taking the time that it takes to learn how to do that well. Because there's a lot of behind the scenes work that it takes to get to the point where you can be on a call or a webinar or in person and have interpreters and translators working together to make sure that people can coordinate. It's an important thing to learn how to do, and when done well, it makes the job of the interpreter and the translator so much easier. And so shout out to all of you all that are holding down language justice work as logistics point people. We also just believe that ourselves as participants in spaces, in movements, in community work, we are also language justice workers. And we can bring that by perhaps being bilingual people and choosing to speak the non-dominant language in a space, even when everyone else is speaking the dominant language, in many cases English. Sometimes as bilingual people, there's this kind of pressure or expectation, like if you can speak English, then just speak English because it makes everything easier for the English speakers. And we really want to start thinking about that more intentionally and saying, if there are bilingual people in the room, how can we encourage each other to speak Spanish or to speak the other languages that we bring to open up that space, again, to push back against English as the dominant language? We also can do this as facilitators and presenters, and this is something that we've been recently in conversation with organizations around the country who, like you saw kind of on the previous slide, they've made that step to reallocate resources, right? So now there's a line item for interpretation, there's a line item for translation, people are really excited, the invitation goes out, and the day of, everyone in the room is speaking in English. And sometimes that can kind of be a little bit demoralizing for organizations to feel like they've made this step, they've made this commitment, and it hasn't yet created a bilingual space. And so one thing that we've been kind of offering and working with organizations to think through is how can we bring that bilingual space or that multilingual space from the get-go by making sure that we have bilingual or multilingual facilitation teams, presenters, panels, keynote speakers, so that it's not all English coming from the front of the room and just crossing our fingers that there's going to be bilingual or multilingual participants that show up, but to ensure that from the get-go, no matter who comes, participants will have the experience of building practice, of using equipment, of working with interpreters to be in a space together across language. And then we just want to name again, we believe that cultural organizers are language justice workers because the work of language justice is the work of culture. It's our relationship to who we are. It's our relationship to our family, to where we come from, to the stories that we know or maybe don't know about ourselves. And so we just want to honor that because we think it's really important that when we say language justice workers, we're talking about all of us, not just the interpreters behind the microphone or the translators who are working on a computer.
Well, with that being said, also, we would like to say that it may seem like these next couple of minutes are focusing heavily on interpreters, and we know the majority of you are not interpreters, but it's important for everybody to understand the skills, knowledge, and training that interpreters need. We are organizers too. We know sometimes we all do the best we can, and it's important to think about how to invest in language justice work in a way that reflects the values and importance. So here are some skills and trainings that we would like to share with you, because sometimes you pull a bilingual staff person and it's not really fair for the person in the staff nor for the message. So here's a quick checklist of some of the things we want to touch on. So that's complete fluency, and also quick decision making, because sometimes, let's say, there's a joke that's been said, and how do you interpret it? Do you do it literally, or do you try to explain the meaning? Or maybe you didn't understand and you say interpreter didn't understand, but this is all going on while at the same time someone is asking you to change the batteries and the speaker is still talking. And also another skill in training is the memory and recall. Remember how it felt to do those 30-second intros? Yeah, it's not so easy, huh? And also, we need lots of focus and concentration. You know, it gets loud, there's lots of things going on at the same time. So it goes as well for split focus and multitasking. We're doing too many things at once and there's already a billion things going on. For interpreter ethics, well, there's a difference of leading with your heart in the moment and having training on respecting people's agency and right to make their own decisions about what they say, even when you don't think it's the best idea. This is a huge professional growth area that most interpreters need, because many of us come to the field with the I want to help. So it sometimes means we may want to act as advocates instead of interpreters. Then there's also specialized vocabulary. Many conferences require technical vocabulary, so we need to prepare glossaries and really read up and prepare ahead of time. Then we also have the experience of creating multilingual spaces. So it's all going on to how to do the intro, setting up the equipment, working with facilitators if things shift, etc. Now, the role of the interpreter, as interpreters orally or visually relay a message from a source language to a target language without adding, deleting, or changing the message. This is why, as interpreters, it is only a small part of language justice work. Relaying a message allows for language access, but alone doesn't build multilingual movement. This is why it takes all of us to build and hold language justice work.
And so we know we just showed you kind of a long laundry list of skills and training that interpreters need. And again, if you're asking yourself, well, I'm not an interpreter, so why is this relevant to me? If there's one thing you take away from that list and from thinking about the role of an interpreter, it's that it's really important to build relationships with trained interpreters and to bring them in to support your work, because not all bilingual people have had the training to be able to carry the message and to be able to act with those ethics and with those practices. And also, not all bilingual people want to interpret. And there's also often a lot of pressure placed on bilingual people to kind of step in as the interpreter. And like Rocio said, we're organizers. We understand that sometimes you just have to do the best you can in a moment, but we're really recommending that organizations and people and institutions build practices around working with trained interpreters and translators. Again, even though not all of you will be interpreting, if you're creating bilingual and multilingual spaces, it's helpful to think about how do you want to create that space. And so there are different modes of interpretation, and as you're planning either your event or your meeting or your conference, you're going to want to be able to think through what kinds of interpretation do I need at different moments in my event. And so you can see on the screen, and we're going to do some modeling so that you can kind of experience how do these different kinds of interpretation work. So consecutive interpretation is when the interpreter listens to the source language
La interpretación consecutiva es cuando el intérprete escucha el lenguaje de partida
and then during a pause reproduces it
y después de una pausa lo reproduce
in the target language.
al lenguaje meta.
So what we just did there is consecutive interpretation. Some benefits to consecutive interpretation are that you don't need interpretation equipment. So it can happen in any moment when a conversation needs to be negotiated across language. A drawback to consecutive interpretation, like you just saw, is it takes twice as long. And so it can be tiring both for participants and for interpreters to use this mode if it's a long event or if there's a lot of people. So another mode of interpretation is simultaneous interpretation. That's when the interpreter listens to the source language and reproduces it into the target language in real time. So like you just saw, simultaneous interpretation often requires equipment, at best requires equipment, because that allows the speakers to just speak and an interpreter is interpreting over the mic and the participants are listening on their headphones or on their phone. So it requires maybe a little bit more technical training. It requires access to equipment, but it allows the conversation to flow much more smoothly and for it to move much more quickly. We do want to make a note that there are also two kinds of simultaneous interpretation, and this is important to think about as you're planning a meeting or an event. So one way simultaneous interpretation is when, most commonly what we see is when there's going to be a speaker speaking in English, or maybe a set of speakers like a panel speaking in English, and the interpreters will be interpreting into Spanish on the headsets. But when a Spanish speaker wants to speak out loud, like with a question or a comment, then the interpreters will say that out loud consecutively so everyone can hear it. This decision is often made if there's not enough equipment for everyone in the room. Interpreters will have to decide to give the equipment to the non-dominant language because there's just not enough equipment for everyone. But one of the impacts of this is it kind of creates an othering. It definitely draws a line between who needs interpretation and who doesn't. And so it's not ideal, but it is something that often organizers and interpreters will have to use if there's not enough equipment for everyone. Ideally, as interpreters, we love to see two-way simultaneous interpretation. That means that everyone who's not bilingual in the room has the equipment on, and no matter who speaks, you're hearing the interpretation into the language that you understand on a headset. We believe this in some ways can be a great equalizer, and we think that it really is encourages people to see each other all as participants in language justice work. It takes more equipment, it takes more commitment, and for it really to have the impact intended, it also takes being intentional about making sure that equal amounts of the language are going to be spoken in the room. Because if everyone has equipment, but the English speakers only have to use it for about 10 minutes out of the 8 hours, you really haven't gotten to create that shared experience and that shared responsibility. So as you're thinking through the kinds of modes that you need, let's say you're planning a meeting or you're planning an event or a convening, now you're able to think, I need some consecutive interpretation because I'm going to do some breakout groups and there won't be enough equipment for that. But mostly I want two-way simultaneous interpretation because I believe that that's a best practice. All of these things you're going to want to talk about and schedule with interpreters and translators as far ahead of time as possible. One, because you want to ensure that you have access to trained people and that you have time to coordinate with them. And two, when working with translators, translators will often charge a rush rate for last-minute requests. And so as you're thinking about how to best care for your budget, it's good to think about coordinating with people as far ahead of time as possible. It's also important to remember that interpreters work in pairs. After about 20 minutes, interpreter stamina kind of starts to drop, even if interpreters don't feel it happening. And so we really encourage for events that are an hour or longer to hire interpreters to work in pairs to ensure high quality interpretation. An emerging practice that we've seen some groups engaging in and that we really applaud and think is really awesome is when your budget allows or when your capacity and relationships allow, bring in a third interpreter or language justice worker to the team. This person can be translating the chats in the chat box if it's a webinar. This person can be scribing on flip charts if you're using flip charts in a space. They can be scribing the sticky notes. That way you make sure that people are connecting across spoken language and visual language and also across written language as well. With all of this said, we know that we're moving quickly through this information. This is kind of just a 101 level webinar. And so when able, we really recommend that you include a language justice worker, interpreter, or translator on your planning team from the very beginning. So if in January you're starting to plan a conference that's going to start in April, we really encourage you to bring in a language justice worker in January. That way they can help you think through your process, your agenda, the speakers, the team, and all of the aspects that you really want to be caring for to create a language justice space. And then think about how you're building that in your design and your plan with speakers, with seating arrangements, with practices and methodologies. We want to encourage you to translate all materials. That may be handouts, that may be PowerPoint, that might be website information. And oftentimes that actually means that organizations have to shift the amount of print material that they're using in English to make sure that they have the budget to cover it in Spanish as well. And so doing language justice work can be transformative in many ways because it helps you learn about planning written material, verbal communication in a totally different way. And sometimes it can be hard, and that's why this is a process. Because of that, you need to allocate resources accordingly. And we are both firm believers in that this is a process. And so organizations and people, you'll start where you are. Start with the resources that you have at hand, and then create your vision about where you want to go and learn to allocate resources accordingly. And then just kind of the last piece that we really want to encourage people to think about in planning is outreach and publicity, which is not the same as hiring interpreters. And I know that sounds really obvious, but in our experience, what we've seen happen many times with organizations and institutions is there's kind of this checkbox like, well, we've hired interpreters, we had the flyer translated, check. And it doesn't translate into people showing up at the events or becoming members or becoming participants. And so we really want to encourage all organizations and everyone who's doing this work to think about how are you building long-term relationships with people, doing that outreach, getting the word out there as you're learning to invest in interpreters, translators, and organizational capacity to do language justice work. We really believe that that's when you'll see the greatest impact.
Now for planning a multilingual event and how to go about it. Well, you will need time to set up and do the intro. So we as interpreters need to get there ahead of time and also explain how the space will work. So check on that checklist. And then everybody can be a language justice worker. So facilitators can give the intro with the interpreters to explain why this is important for their organization. Bilingual participants can bring the non-dominant language. You can create a shared glossary on a flip chart to encourage people to learn some words from each other's languages, etc. Also, so that's check, equipment and batteries. We need to make sure that the equipment has been tested beforehand and that there's enough batteries. And if we go to like a large conference that requires us to get extra equipment, make sure that the equipment is compatible, and you don't have to be an interpreter to do this piece, so check on that. Inclusive seating plan. Well, sometimes out of necessity of lack of equipment, organizations ask people to sit together to listen to an interpreter. This is isolating and not ideal. Think about creative ways to get people to sit together across languages, language differences. So check on that. and table and a space to work. We will need a table to set up the equipment, and also it'd be great if there's like some water placed on the table, some chocolate, a healing kit for the stress. So check on that too.
And so I know that we focus a lot on working with interpreters and translators and kind of creating bilingual and multilingual spaces, both in person and virtually. And we want to really remember that all of us can be language justice workers and doing that work together. Like we shared, there are different roles and different capacities, and everyone in the room or in the space needs to be committed together to really make that happen. And so we wanted to take a couple of minutes just to hear from you all if you have any reflections or questions about this first piece around creating multilingual spaces and multilingual work. And so at this point, Al, if you could help us out, we would love to give people the opportunity to share their video and unmute themselves if they want to ask questions. Does that work?
All right. So everyone, I will give you the option to unmute and put your video on in the next 10 seconds.
We'll just wait a couple minutes to see if there are questions or comments. We really would love to hear if there's anything kind of sitting on your mind or on your heart after going through that material. Hello.
All right, if there's anybody I missed, just chat me. I think I got everybody.
Any questions from you all? I know we covered a lot of material there, but what kind of stands out from you, either as people who have done some creation of bilingual spaces or are looking to do that kind of work? Any thoughts or questions?
Hey, Andrea, this is Sandy.
Hi.
I'm really embarrassed. I thought I was doing a pretty good job at doing this, but after listening to you guys, I really have missed the mark a lot. And in Alabama, my battle has been when I go in to do workshops and training and critical incident debriefings is to tell them we need an interpreter there. And I thought that was good enough just to fight that battle to get someone there and I've left out so much and I feel really bad. And it's been very helpful to have this training because I wasn't even aware of your services. And I mean, I think not long ago I had to go to a critical incident debriefing and they had a 30% Hispanic population and they didn't want to pay for an interpreter. And so they're like, well, why do we need you then? And I was like, that was the roadblock I had, but I thought just having somebody there that could speak Spanish was sufficient. And I'm failing. I'm not meeting all the. I'm not doing everybody justice, and I realize that. So I appreciate the work y'all are doing.
Oh, thank you so much, Sandy, for sharing that. I don't think that that's an uncommon feeling and reaction. A lot of times when we hold these kind of language justice 101 spaces, we hear that a lot from people. And I think it's important to recognize and honor just the work that it takes to advocate for, hey, we probably should have an interpreter in here, and that's as far as we've been able to get. Like we said, I really think that this work is kind of a journey. And the more we can learn together about creating shared practices and connect with each other, we can deepen our ability to do this work. So I really hope you don't feel discouraged. I hope you feel encouraged to be able to keep reaching out and figuring out how to build this work over time.
No, I feel empowered. I recognize my weakness and my failure, and I feel like, all right, now I know I can do something more. So that's good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that. Anybody else with either questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question. My name's Layla and I work here at CSE. And I have a question. So one of the things you brought up was, and I've seen a lot, especially in Asheville, where there's a lot of social justice organizations and movements and meetings, and they're very white-centric and they're very English-centric. And so I'm just curious if you either now or maybe later have any advice for not just translating documents and information, and not just the event itself, but outreach, like maybe specific ways that we can do some outreach to Spanish-speaking folks or other languages in the area, and either specifically or maybe how I should be thinking in my mind, just a little bit changing something.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything? Or?
So on the outreach part, it is kind of like it takes some time for people to find out about, oh, well, there's actually interpretation provided and things like that. But also, at least for the Hispanic community, it's a lot of like a word of mouth type of deal. So just be aware of that. So definitely try to get as many things translated and printed and out there, but also make sure you're building relationship with communities of other languages so that they have access to that information.
I do think that that's a question that's coming up all over the place. And so maybe that's a whole nother webinar and a whole nother conversation just around how do we do multiracial organizing in a way that's rooted in relationships and building relationships, especially so that as organizations are investing in language justice resources, they don't feel that like that disappointment after, like, oh, this wasn't a worthwhile investment. It's not building participation. I think as organizers, we know just logistics doesn't ensure participation and trust and relationship. So yeah, I think we could have a whole conversation, and I think that people, organizers from around the South and around the country would have a lot to add about what does it take to do relationship building and movement. Yeah. Maybe if there's one more question, and if not, we actually would like to give the welcome to our special guests. So let's see if there's any other questions or comments about this first part. Okay, so we are going to welcome first Kayla Estrada Cruz. And Kayla will be joining us to share some of her experiences as a cultural organizer. Kayla is also a worker owner of Cenzontle Language Justice Cooperative, so we're really excited for her to be here. And Kayla will be speaking in Spanish. And so just a reminder, if you would like to hear interpretation into English, make sure you're calling in on that audio line. And we're gonna have Kayla do like a 1 or 2 sentence introduction. And if you're not able to hear her, we're gonna pause and make sure people have time to write on the chat if they're having any difficulty hearing. So I'm gonna rotate the computer super high-tech style. Here we have Kayla.
Hola, buenas noches. Mi nombre es Kayla Estrada. No sé si todos me pueden escuchar.
So let's check in, make sure everyone's hearing that interpretation. If not, please put something in the chat box. If we don't see chats coming in that people can't hear, we're going to assume we are good to go.
Bueno, como dije, mi nombre es Kayla Estrada. Yo llegué aquí a Estados Unidos en el 2015. Fue difícil venir al país cuando no sabía nada de inglés. Y bueno, todavía sigo trabajando en eso. Cuando llegué...
Pausas tantito, perdón.
Okay.
We're hearing some technical difficulties, so we're just going to take about 30 seconds to see if we can figure that out. Al, will you help me out on this piece?
We're on it.
Thank you. Are we good to go again? See you all, this is language justice work. It's not perfect. It takes some practice. It takes some teamwork. Here we go.
¿Empiezo desde el principio?
Sí.
Okay. Bueno, como dije, mi nombre es Kayla Estrada. Yo soy de México y llegué aquí a Estados Unidos en el 2015. Para mí fue difícil llegar a este país porque no sabía el idioma y casi luego que llegué entré al high school como un junior y fue más difícil aún porque pues todas mis clases eran en inglés, no podía entender nada, los maestros no comprendían esa parte de que pues una persona que recién llega y no habla inglés y lo forzan a que haga las tareas puntuales, a que entienda todo lo que se le está diciendo en la clase y que no te dan ese espacio de que puedan entenderte lo que se siente venir a un país cuando no se habla el idioma. Entonces para mí fue difícil porque también ver cómo mis mismos compañeros que hablaban español e inglés tenían que interpretarme cuando no era su responsabilidad, porque era responsabilidad de la escuela tener intérpretes y sentirse estresados de tener que interpretar cuando pues ese no era su papel. Entonces para mí fue frustrante y casi todos los días llegaba a mi casa enojada y triste de quererme regresar a México porque no era un espacio en el que yo me sentía bien y bienvenida. Y también el no ver maestros que se parecieran a mí, siempre ver maestros blancos y que no entendían nada de lo que era mi cultura, ni lo que era mi idioma, ni lo que era yo, ni compañeros que habían venido al país igual que yo. Entonces, también otra de mis experiencias es que desde que llegué también he tenido que ocupar el equipo de interpretación, que se ha vuelto parte de mis rutinas, parte de asistir a talleres, a conferencias, a reuniones y pues es difícil estar pasar 4 horas o pasar 5 horas teniendo el equipo de interpretación en tu oreja y tener que ir atrás de lo que la gente te está diciendo, ir 2 segundos atrás de lo que la persona dice y a veces no tener tiempo de poder expresarte o decir tus preguntas porque pues ya avanzó esa parte que ya te dijeron. Entonces es bien difícil tratarte de sentir bienvenido en el espacio cuando no te puedes expresar a pesar de tener la interpretación. Entonces, a veces tener la interpretación no es suficiente para sentirte parte de, porque hay gente que decía, bueno, tenemos la interpretación, iba a venir gente latina y todo, pero llegabas y no tenían cosas traducidas. Entonces decías, bueno, se intentó, pero tienen que tener como más, tener más intención de poder traer a la comunidad a sus espacios. Entonces para mí fue muy difícil todo eso y también a veces tener que decirlo porque a veces yo me sentía frustrada de no poder expresarme y tener que quedarme callada y luego me decían, pues dilo, di qué es lo que sientes, di que necesitan tener información traducida, que necesitan hacerte sentir bienvenidas a las personas que están ahí, que hablan español. Entonces, para mí fue también algo difícil que se ha seguido trabajando y que se ha mejorado en algunos lugares porque han decidido seguir trabajando y involucrarse más lo que es la justicia del lenguaje y que no solo involucra la interpretación y la traducción, pero que va más allá de todo eso. Y pues también he estado trabajando con un programa que se llama Raíces, que es de cultura, que se da en las escuelas de aquí del condado de Roncombe, que se trabaja con Elementary, Middle y Intermediate School y es para promover la cultura a partir de la danza folclórica y también de seguir llevando el español hacia los jóvenes porque es algo que se ha visto que también se ha dejado y no queremos que se pierda, lo que queremos es que se siga transmitiendo generación tras generación para que no podamos perder los idiomas de raíces que tenemos, así como idiomas indígenas que se han perdido. También otro proyecto en el que estoy trabajando, abrimos un preescolar hace un año y para nosotros fue muy importante este proyecto porque hemos visto que muchos niños no tienen, bueno, problemas de que los papás tienen que trabajar y todo, tienen que ir a daycare o tienen que ir a Head Start y empiezan a aprender el inglés desde muy temprano y ya empiezan a olvidar el español, entonces no pueden tener la comunicación con los papás, con sus abuelos, ya cuando son grandes o es difícil para ellos la gramática y todo eso, entonces decidimos empezar el proyecto con los niños de preescolar completamente en español y poder seguir pasando la cultura y el idioma a través de juegos, dinámicas, etcétera. Creo que es todo lo que tengo.
So we wanted Kayla to share both her experiences and the language justice work that she's doing to really make sure that we're creating space tonight to talk about language justice work as cultural work, as the work of revitalizing and caring for languages so that they can stay alive in our communities. We're going to hear from another dear friend and compañero Daniel about his language justice work in our community, and then we'll open it up kind of for questions and reflections for both of them. So here we will pass the screen over to Daniel.
All right, hey everyone, hope you're doing good on the other side of the screen. And so my name is Daniel Suber, and I work with like kind of like my main work here in the city of Asheville is working with young people and community groups and groups that really serve the people that are really involved with what they say they're involved in. And language justice is a part of that. It's a big part of that. So I mean, I recently graduated from the University of North Carolina at Asheville, and I've just been working with different groups for a number of years now, just learning whatever I can. And I happened to get involved with a group called Word on the Street. And Word on the Street is an online platform. Basically, it's a youth group that maintains an online platform for young people around the world to submit their artwork to, and their forms of expression and their culture and this different forms of art and expression. And this team, the team that leads Word on the Street, is a group of teenagers. They're all Black and brown, Latinx, young people, different backgrounds, in and around the city of Asheville. So why do I do this work? This work is important because I get to see young people learn and grow and exchange culture and just to be themselves in a space and not have to feel pressured to be something else and to be free to speak how they want to speak. And like I think that's really significant. Like maybe while these young people are at school, like they're feeling the pressures of school and they have to think about different dynamics. And when they get to be a Word on the Street, which is also called Voz de los Jóvenes, which is Voice of the Youth in Spanish, when they are there, they get to be more of themselves. I think that is very important. And that is something that I wish that I had the opportunity to tap into when I was a teenager, you know, just to be able to meet people from different backgrounds. And it's a space just like all Black and brown youth, essentially. And yeah, so with our organization, language justice is one of our main values, just like community and social justice and art. And language justice, having a space where we are doing our best to weave language justice like in everything that we do. And we're not perfect, never will we be perfect, but we do our best. And I think that's something that's, it's worth it. It's worth it to do that. It's worth it to give the effort. It's worth it to see the results. It's worth it to see the smiles on young people's faces. And yeah, I'm thankful every day just for the opportunity to do that kind of work and to learn from the young people that I see all the time. So yeah, I mean, I do speak mostly English, and I do speak some Spanish, but I'm definitely not fully bilingual, like at all. And still, it's definitely important to me to uplift language justice, because language justice is not just about English and Spanish. Language justice is about someone being able to speak and speak as they want to speak, to be who they are through their language. And so some of the things like interpretation like that really helps us in the space to encourage that. um, so yeah, this is just a wonderful opportunity. We work hand in hand with Cenzontle very often. They're our team that helps us to maintain language justice in our space with our young people. Some of them are bilingual, some of them speak mostly Spanish, some of them speak mostly English, and they're all really goofy and they're all hilarious. And I love to see them have the opportunity to be as goofy as they want to be in that space, and whatever language they want to do it in their slang, whatever they want to say, right? So yeah, that's one of the programs that I work with. There's also another program that I worked with through the Center for Participatory Change. So the Center for Participatory Change recently had a 6-week, we can call it a course, where Black and brown people in and around Asheville came together. Black and brown and Latinx people came together to exchange culture and language, to learn more about whatever language. So either they wanted to learn more about Spanish, or either they wanted to learn more about English in the language, but not only the language, but in culture as well. And like, what are the families like? And in someone's culture, what was their city like? Um, what do they believe about language and language justice? And how do they feel most comfortable expressing themselves? We look through the history of language and language justice. So to me, getting the opportunity to see that with adults, getting a chance to express themselves and stuff, was significant. And I don't know, just like the smiles and laughter and tears of joy and sadness, all of that together showed me that we should have more spaces where language justice is intentionally welcomed into a space. Yeah, I want to see that much more. And thank y'all for listening.
So now that you've gotten to hear a little bit about how both Kayla and Daniel consider themselves language justice workers, neither of them work as interpreters or translators, but are doing some of the most important language justice work in our community: multiracial organizing, cultural work, work with young people, work building relationships, just like we talked about. How do we build these relationships to then bring people into organizations and movement? Both Kayla and Daniel are doing that really important work. And so we wanted to open up space now for you all, to invite you all to unmute yourselves if you have questions, and if you would like to turn your videos back on so that we can see each other. And I'm going to put Kayla and Daniel here, and just take some time to either ask questions, share reflections, and talk about these other elements of language justice work.
So I am unmuting and asking folks to start their videos over the next 10 seconds.
So yeah, we do want to give this opportunity to connect with people on the other side of these screens, and just see what do you think about your time thinking about language justice. If you have, especially if you have any questions for us about maybe the inspirations, the challenges, the victories, in doing this work, and we welcome you.
So at this point, any questions that you all have, you can either share in the chat. We'll be following the chat. You can also turn your video back on and unmute yourselves. And all four of us are here. We're sitting here on the table. So Rocio, myself, Kayla, and Daniel, the rest of our time on the call tonight is to have either any conversation or to answer any questions that may have come up. We know that we shared a lot. We shared about the nuts and bolts of creating multilingual spaces. We shared best practices with interpreters and translators. You've heard personal experiences of what it's like interacting in English dominant spaces. You've heard some about cultural organizing and how that relationship building is also part of language justice work. So if you have any thoughts, questions, or reflections, we would love to hear from you all and see you all as well. So we'll just take a couple minutes to see if there's anything on anybody's mind.
I have a question. And you all mentioned a little bit about this early on, but I'm just curious how you see language justice and economic justice intertwined, and how one informs how we can think about the other.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think for us, and I'm going to bring Rocio into this, I think for us, obviously, the way that we see those as informing each other is that we can come together as language justice workers and organize collectively around economics and finances. One of the reasons why we started Cenzontle as a cooperative was because we know that interpreting and translating and consulting can be difficult fields to break into. And because a lot of times, and it's true for a lot of movement work and organizing work, it's based on relationships often. And so what we were noticing is that bilingual young people were facing increased barriers on becoming new interpreters in our town and in our region. And so we created this cooperative as a way to offer training opportunities. One of cooperative's main values is that members should always have access to education and capacity building. And so that way we can kind of participate in a constant sharing and transfer of skills that actually translates into people being able to provide for themselves and their families. We also think that it's an equity issue, that as organizations and movements are dedicating more resources to the work of language justice and interpreters and translators, we want to make sure that young people and bilingual people in community that have often faced language injustice for so many years are being able to access opportunities for employment. I don't know, would you add anything to that, Rocio?
No, I think you hit it right. I wanted to add so.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Sandy again. Just
Yeah.
kind of, this might take it a little more political than we want to. I truly believe the work you're doing is desperately needed. But I feel like in this environment we're in, when so many of these communities are under attack right now, that's even more important. Do you have any, is that presenting any more obstacles for you or opportunities right now?
I know Rocio and I might have something to say, but I wonder if Kayla and Daniel, do you have any thoughts around just given all of the things our communities are facing, what are the particular obstacles and opportunities?
Mm. Yeah, so when I think about the communities facing challenges, the political landscape and opportunities, I think that it's the same as it's always been, that a lot has changed and nothing has changed. Just that maybe people see more of like kind of what's going on now with the help of the internet and with the help of people that have forced it to be blatantly obvious that our country does not necessarily and has not necessarily like welcomed people the way that it should, especially with the values that it claims to hold true to itself with the, like the face of the United States.
But we're not even honest with our own history, so.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and some people are deliberately probably ignoring or dishonest, and some people are kind of brainwashed, so to speak. Yeah, just that they're being given mishistory, like they are given lies, they're given falsities, and then they grow up believing it. They get it from, when they're little kids, they grow up believing these things, and they're told it and they're taught it. And as far as they know, it's true and they're right. And they hold on to being right so much that they miss out on a lot of beautiful things, a lot of beautiful people. Like it's like a blockage in someone's soul. They grow up believing a lot of the things that are taught in our country, that those people do not really grow up knowing themselves. They do not grow up really knowing their own history. So how can they really know someone else or know someone else's history? How can they love themselves? How can they love someone else? Yeah, there's plenty of challenges, and the challenge is just people and personalities and egos and the economics and all that stuff. It's all a challenge, and it's all also opportunity, all of it, every single bit. There's always an opportunity to meet someone and change someone's mind, just through being who we are, just through showing what we show, through the experiences, through the work that we're doing. For someone to see that work, they could have an adverse reaction. They could have a very positive reaction. Either way, they're going to learn something. And it even takes time for people to realize things. Like we have to come to a certain level of understanding through what we experience. And by being really consistent with what we do, by really being consistent with our values, like it shines light in a dark room, and it begins to light other people's lights. That's why I think that this work, we can say it's language justice work, but I think that it's equity work, and that we can call racial justice work, but it's equity work. And we can say gender and identity. We can say a lot of things. We can say that it's religious values, making sure that it's religious equity. It's all equity. Economic justice is all equity. It's all about thinking that everyone deserves to have an opportunity to be successful in life. And basically any person could have been any other person. So why would we make it hard for any other person? Or why would we let things be hard for another person if we can change it? So that's why I encourage everyone, whatever it is that you believe in, the things that you're seeing, through the work that you're doing, the people that you're meeting that really uphold these values, that do this language justice work, Cenzontle, when we see these things, please uplift these things, uplift it within yourself, uplift it within others whenever you can. And you never know who you're inspiring. And it just causes those waves and those ripples and makes people smile. So.
I would say too that that's part of the reason why we talk about language justice work, both around creating language access, like you've mentioned, that's kind of been your starting point, is advocating for interpreters to be in a space, and why we're really inviting everyone to think about it as something so much bigger than that, because we believe to really keep each other safe and to care for each other, and we need to build relationships. we need to understand each other. We need to be able to show up as the full people that we are. And so that's why we really think that language access, cultural work, and organizing, they really need to be in relationship with each other to create the kind of transformation that we're trying to create. Any other?
Thank you. And I'm so impressed with you guys. And I'm so hopeful listening to that young man talk for our future generations. It's just a great young man. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah.
Thank y'all too.
Any other thoughts or questions or reflections? Take a couple minutes to see if there's anybody else that wants to speak or share.
I do have a question actually.
We have a question here.
Yeah. So I have a question actually from Andre and Rocio, which are, like what really inspired you to do the work that you do?
I'm sorry if anyone's getting seasick with the moving of the screen. I promise we're going to get better and better at this as time goes on. Rocio?
Well, as I have mentioned earlier, not only is it the fact that I experienced it, firsthand, not knowing the language, feeling othered and whatnot, but it's also, I have been privileged to know both languages, and I see the injustice, and as Sandy mentioned, then also with the political climate we're in, there's just this highlight of criminalizing our communities, and it's about showing more of our bigger self, bigger whole persons, where there's multiple identities running through me as a Hispanic female, as an American, as well as many things all happening at once, and there's many contradictions happening at once as well, and it's not being approached, it's not being addressed. It's just like one-sided or two-sided. It's either you are Hispanic, taking our resources and whatnot, and it's also being able to uplift, telling our full stories of our full selves. So it's not only for my community, it's for myself and for everybody to who deserves to be seen as full humans, because that's what we are. So this is what inspires me to do the work, and to also be an inspiration to others as well for our future generations.
I think for me, I came into interpreting just because I'm also an organizer, and so being a bilingual person, somebody put a mic in my hand at an event that that an interpreter wasn't there for, and that's how I got started, and was just wanting to offer like a useful, concrete skill to my community and to the movements that I'm involved with. But over time, I've come to reflect on kind of myself, my family, and the historical context of our country. And I come from, immigrant people that did choose to assimilate and lose language, from Irish immigrants and Swedish immigrants, and those languages have been lost in my blood family line. And so as someone who became bilingual, thinking about how can I be a language justice worker that recognizes the harm that's been done by the creation of whiteness, by the enforcement of whiteness, by the kind of forced or chosen choice to assimilate, as someone who's doing multiracial work and multiracial organizing. And so part of it is looking at that recognition of assimilation in our country and how that has erased so many languages and how that's affected different communities differently in terms of their proximity to whiteness, and really owning that. And then as a mother of 3 kids whose first language is Spanish, wanting to always work in community to create spaces where they can bring that Spanish and where they don't look back 3 generations later and say, well, Spanish was also lost in our in our family line. And so for me, there's this kind of commitment to collective movement organizing, and then there's this recognition of who I am as a person and what that calls of me to do. Yeah, thank you for the question, Daniel. I don't often get asked those questions. It's more like, how do you change the channel on the interpretation equipment? And we're like, oh, just pull back the back and turn it on. Yeah. We have just a couple more minutes if there's any last questions or reflections. And then if not, Rocio will share a little bit about how you can keep in touch with us if this is a conversation that you just want to, that you're just starting and want to continue. So any last questions? And if not, we'll start to wrap up. Take it away, Rocio.
Well, thank you. All the questions have been great so far. And well, we thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to do this webinar with us. You could have been doing anything else. But we also would love to keep in touch and build relationship with you all. Our cooperative is a learning organization, and so we're figuring things out as we go along. And so please keep in touch. Our email is info@cenzontle.coop, and that's CENZONTLE, info@cenzontle.coop. Thank you so very much for sticking with us.
And I think Al is going to close us out, maybe.
I can, yes. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Also, all of the audio has been recorded for this evening, and this webinar has been recorded. That will be available via email. A link to those will be provided to you by Adam Pulaski, who you probably heard from when you RSVP'd to get the link to join the meeting. So that should come in about a week. We will also post these on our website, and I will type that in the chat. It's southernequality.org, and there will be a specific link for each webinar. So thank you so much again, Cenzontle. Thank you so much to our presenters. And
goodbye.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing more and speaking with you again. So if you have any questions at all, please reach out to Cenzontle, or I'll put our info@southernequality in the chat as well. And that's all I have. So if you all have anything else to add, feel free to do so now while I am typing. All right. Thank you so much. Till we meet again.
Everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.